Imagine this: you're a dedicated service member, a proud patriot who has sworn an oath to defend your country, and yet one fateful night, everything you stand for is challenged by a betrayal from those you trusted most. Picture yourself behind the wheel of your favorite ride, a sleek, polished Chevy Tahoe that mirrors your impeccable discipline and commitment to honor. The night is calm, the horizon bathed in the soft glow of twilight, and you're just looking forward to a peaceful drive home after a long day of service. But in an instant, the serenity shatters. Flashing red and blue lights slice through the darkness, and your heart skips a beat. What could have possibly gone wrong? As you slow down, the questions begin to pile up. Why would law enforcement, the very embodiment of protection, target someone like you, a uniformed soldier with nothing to hide? You recall every lesson from your training: remain calm, comply, and always be prepared. Yet, as the officers approach with expressions that betray a deep-seated aggression, an unsettling chill runs down your spine. Their eyes, devoid of the expected respect, fixate on you with an intensity that is more menacing than reassuring. In that split second, you realize that this isn't just a routine traffic stop. It's something far more sinister, a situation where the rules you've lived by are suddenly thrown into chaos. Your hands tremble as you raise them in a gesture of compliance, each second stretching into an eternity. The air around you feels charged with tension and confusion. The officers bark out conflicting orders: one demands you step out immediately, while the other insists your hands remain visible. Their voices, harsh and unyielding, echo in your ears, drowning out your racing thoughts. You can't help but wonder, what did you do to deserve this? Was it something as simple as a misinterpreted action, or is there a darker force at play, one that targets those who serve their nation with unwavering loyalty? In this bewildering moment, every instinct you have honed over years of service is screaming at you to stay alert. Yet, a creeping sense of vulnerability overtakes your rational mind. Here you are, a symbol of valor in your crisp uniform, reduced to a figure of suspicion and hostility by those sworn to uphold the law. The irony is as bitter as it is jarring: a protector now subjected to the very aggression he once vowed to shield others from. What unseen factors could drive law enforcement to treat a dedicated soldier with such disdain? Is it an issue of bias, a deep-rooted prejudice that has seeped into the very fabric of the system, or something even more insidious? As you try to process the surreal scene unfolding before you, a burning realization sets in: this incident might not be isolated to your own experience. It could be the tip of an iceberg, a stark indication of a system riddled with unchecked power and prejudice. In that pivotal moment, you muster the courage to act not only for yourself but for every individual who has ever felt marginalized, disrespected, or betrayed by the institutions meant to protect them. With shaking fingers, you reach for your phone. The decision to document every detail is not made lightly; it's a desperate bid to capture the truth, to expose the injustice that is unfolding right before your eyes. Now, consider this: what if your very act of recording could spark a national conversation? What if, in an era where every moment is shared and scrutinized, your experience becomes the catalyst for sweeping change in how law enforcement is held accountable? Can one act of defiance in the face of overwhelming adversity challenge a system that has long been shielded by silence and indifference? These are the questions that now haunt your mind, each one a stark reminder that the fight for justice is far from over. As the situation escalates, the atmosphere becomes even more charged with tension. The officers, their faces contorted with an inexplicable fury, suddenly unleash a barrage of pepper spray that engulfs you in a cloud of burning agony. The pain is immediate and searing, blinding you as tears stream down your face. In that harrowing moment, you're forced to confront the brutal reality that your uniform, once a badge of honor, has become a target, a symbol that marks you not as a hero, but as an outsider in the eyes of those meant to safeguard the community. The bitter sting of the spray is more than physical; it pierces deep into your soul, leaving you reeling in disbelief and despair. You are quickly overwhelmed, the pain and humiliation merging into a disorienting haze as you are forcibly removed from your vehicle. As you sit on the cold, unforgiving pavement, your hands bound and your spirit battered, a profound question begins to crystallize in your mind: how did this happen? How did the very system that you devoted your life to protecting transform into a force of oppression, capable of inflicting such cruelty on someone who has served with honor? The questions multiply like a relentless echo in the silence of that fateful night. Were you merely a victim of circumstance, caught in the crossfire of a misinterpreted encounter? Or was this a deliberate act, a manifestation of a deeper, systemic issue that has eroded the trust between the people and those entrusted with their safety? And perhaps most haunting of all, what does this incident say about the future of accountability and justice in a country that prides itself on freedom and equality? In the midst of your pain and confusion, a spark of determination begins to kindle within you. This is not just about a single incident, it's about a pattern of behavior that must be challenged and reformed. The memory of that night, the searing pain of the pepper spray, and the betrayal by those who were supposed to protect you will not fade into obscurity. Instead, it becomes a rallying cry, a call to arms for every citizen who believes in justice, equality, and the sanctity of service. Imagine the possibility: your voice, your courage, your documented truth could ignite a movement that demands systemic change. What if this painful experience forces a nationwide reckoning with the practices that have long allowed bias and brutality to go unchecked? Could one person's fight against injustice serve as the spark that transforms an entire system? These are the questions that now linger, echoing in the hearts of all who have ever questioned the integrity of authority. As you reflect on these tumultuous events, one thing becomes undeniable: this moment, as harrowing as it is, holds the potential to change the course of history. The confrontation, the pain, and the betrayal you endured might just be the beginning of a powerful narrative, a narrative that challenges every preconceived notion about justice and loyalty. What will you do next? Will you let this experience break you, or will you rise above it, becoming a beacon of hope and a catalyst for reform? In this pivotal juncture, the road ahead is uncertain, yet filled with the promise of transformative change. The truth you capture, the story you live through, and the questions you dare to ask will resonate far beyond this moment. And as you stand on the precipice of a new chapter, one where your courage and determination could rewrite the rules of engagement between citizens and the institutions meant to serve them, you must ask yourself: are you ready to challenge a system that has long evaded accountability? Are you prepared to become the change that our nation so desperately needs? The night may be dark, and the road ahead fraught with challenges, but the call for justice is louder than ever. In the face of overwhelming adversity, your story is poised to ignite a revolution of thought and action. And as the questions linger, questions that demand answers, demand accountability, and demand a future where every voice is heard, you are left with a single, resounding thought: the fight for justice begins now, and it starts with you. This is the moment where the line between heroism and sacrifice blurs. Can you see yourself in this narrative, questioning, daring, and fighting back against the forces that seek to silence the truth? What would you do if your badge of honor was met with aggression and injustice? Stay tuned as we unravel the full story, a story that challenges every assumption and dares you to question the very system meant to protect us all. Lieutenant Jamal Carter's day had been long. Clad in his immaculate military uniform and driving his sleek new Chevy Tahoe, every detail of his appearance radiated pride and discipline. The polished metal of his vehicle and the crisp fabric of his uniform were constant reminders of his service and sacrifice for a nation he deeply loved. As twilight descended and the promise of a quiet evening beckoned him home, fate intervened in the most unexpected and harrowing way. While cruising along a familiar stretch of road, Jamal's peaceful routine was shattered by the sudden intrusion of flashing red and blue lights in his rearview mirror. The piercing glare of the emergency vehicles cut through the dusk, and within seconds, his heart began to race. Despite the growing apprehension in his chest, he remembered his training: always comply with authority. With a calm exterior masking the turmoil within, he gradually pulled over to the side of the road, determined to adhere to every instruction given. As Jamal awaited the approach of the officers, his mind raced over the day's events. He had spent hours serving his country, ensuring the safety and freedom of others. Yet, in this moment, he was reduced to a figure of vulnerability, an active duty soldier suddenly caught in a situation that defied all the principles he had sworn to uphold. When the uniformed figures finally emerged from their patrol vehicles, their expressions were far from what one would expect from protectors of the law. Their faces bore a twisted aggression that unsettled him immediately. Trembling yet resolute, Jamal raised his hands in a gesture of compliance. He had been trained to obey and respect the chain of command, and so he did, even as his instincts screamed that something was terribly amiss. The officers' voices soon filled the night with conflicting orders. One officer barked harshly, "Step out of the vehicle now," while his partner simultaneously demanded, "Keep your hands where we can see them." The dissonance in their commands left Jamal paralyzed, caught between the ingrained need to follow orders and an overwhelming sense of danger. In that agonizing moment, the young lieutenant's heart pounded not only with fear but also with disbelief. How could the very individuals tasked with ensuring his safety turn into figures of menace? His mind, trained for quick decision-making under fire, struggled to process the escalating tension. With hands raised in surrender, Jamal's eyes darted from one officer to the other, desperately trying to decipher their intentions. The stark contrast between his polished uniform and the hostile demeanor of the officers underscored an unsettling irony. Here was a man who had dedicated his life to protecting the nation, now facing aggression from those meant to serve and protect. Realizing that silence could be his only ally in the midst of chaos, Jamal's trembling hands remained raised as he attempted to articulate his position. "I'm actively serving this country," he managed to say, his voice wavering with both disbelief and a trace of defiance. Yet, his words seemed to fall on deaf ears. The officers, unmoved by the honor his uniform represented, advanced closer with an intensity that bordered on brutality. Their aggression was not a measured response to any perceived threat, it was an inexplicable, almost visceral display of hostility that left Jamal questioning his every decision. In the midst of this confusion, a single, instinctual thought flashed through his mind: document everything. With shaking fingers, Jamal reached for his phone. The decision to record the encounter was not one he took lightly. He knew that in a situation mired in ambiguity and conflicting commands, every second of evidence could prove crucial. Little did he know that this act of defiance, of asserting his right to transparency, would soon expose a web of injustice that extended far beyond his own experience. As the situation spiraled out of control, the officer's unpredictable actions escalated to a level that shocked even a seasoned soldier like Jamal. Before he could fully comprehend the gravity of the moment, a burning sensation exploded across his face. In a swift and brutal motion, one of the officers deployed a canister of pepper spray, engulfing Jamal in a cloud of searing pain. The intense, stinging burn in his eyes forced him to gasp and struggle for breath, while tears blurred his vision. Every instinct told him to recoil, yet his training, and the chaos of the moment, kept him rooted in place. Within moments, the assault reached its climax. Jamal was forcibly removed from his vehicle, his arms tightly bound in handcuffs, and the overwhelming shock of the encounter began to settle into a deeper, more painful reality. As he sat on the cold pavement, his eyes still burning from the spray, a profound sense of betrayal washed over him. How could a uniformed soldier, whose every action was designed to protect and serve, be treated with such disdain and cruelty by those entrusted with upholding the law? Struggling to regain his composure amidst the searing pain and humiliation, Jamal could only watch in stunned silence as the officers began their interrogations. Their questions, laced with a blend of accusatory tones and barely concealed contempt, dug into him like a series of unwarranted probes. Every query was a stark reminder that his service, his sacrifices, and the honor of his uniform were being systematically disregarded. The contrast between the values he held dear and the reality of his current situation was too glaring to ignore. Amid the turmoil, as the physical agony in his eyes began to subside into a dull throb, a new realization took root in Jamal's mind. This incident was not just an isolated episode of abuse, it was a symptom of a much larger, deeply entrenched problem. It was a glaring example of a system that allowed prejudice and unchecked authority to run rampant, often at the expense of those who had given everything for their country. The injustice he faced that night was not solely his burden to bear, it was a rallying cry for every individual who had ever been marginalized, mistreated, or silenced. Even as he remained handcuffed on the curb, the embers of indignation were fanned into a fierce determination. Jamal resolved that he would not let this abuse go unchallenged. His decision was immediate and unequivocal: he would fight, not just for his own dignity, but for the countless others who had suffered similar indignities without the platform or the means to speak out. His uniform, once a source of pride and protection, had been transformed into a symbol of the systemic failures that demanded accountability and reform. As paramedics arrived to treat his injuries, Jamal's mind was already racing ahead to the future. He knew that the documentation on his phone, combined with his personal testimony, could ignite a firestorm of public scrutiny and demand meaningful change. Even as he endured the sting of the pepper spray and the cold grip of handcuffs, he began to see himself not just as a victim of an isolated incident, but as an advocate for a broader movement against institutional injustice. News of the traffic stop and the shocking abuse began to spread like wildfire. What started as a local story quickly snowballed into a national conversation, fueled by the raw, unfiltered footage captured on Jamal's phone. Social media platforms erupted with outrage and disbelief as citizens from all walks of life rallied behind him. His experience resonated deeply with communities who had long felt the sting of systemic bias and discrimination. Veterans, civil rights groups, and even a few courageous law enforcement insiders came forward, lending their support and amplifying his call for justice. Amid the growing public outcry, Jamal sought the counsel of a seasoned civil rights attorney, Ms. Stephanie Monroe. When he recounted the harrowing details of that fateful night and shared the body cam footage along with his own recording, Ms. Monroe's expression grew increasingly grave. "This is serious," she declared, her voice firm with determination. "We need to ensure that what happened to you never happens to anyone else." Her words not only validated his pain but also steeled his resolve to confront a system that too often seemed designed to silence dissent. As Jamal and his legal team meticulously prepared their case, the incident took on a momentum of its own. The bodycam footage began circulating online, sparking heated debates and prompting media outlets to seek interviews with the brave lieutenant who had suffered such a grave injustice. The public's response was overwhelming. Messages of encouragement poured in, alongside expressions of anger and sorrow from communities across the nation. Every comment, every share, added to the chorus demanding that those responsible for this abuse be held accountable. Yet, with the burgeoning support came a fierce wave of scrutiny. Jamal found himself thrust into the eye of a media storm, his every word dissected and debated by commentators on every platform. While many hailed him as a hero, others staunchly defended the actions of the officers, arguing that the situation was more complex than it appeared. The intense public scrutiny, the relentless barrage of opinions, and the high stakes of his legal battle weighed heavily on him. Still, even as doubts crept in during moments of isolation, Jamal's inner resolve remained unshaken. "If not me, then who?" he thought repeatedly. "If not now, then when?" The decision to file a federal lawsuit against the officers was not taken lightly. Jamal understood the profound implications of his actions. He was not merely seeking personal vindication, he was challenging a system that had long evaded accountability for its misdeeds. His case, he believed, had the power to ignite a transformation in policing practices, one that could ensure a fairer, more just society for all. With every step of the legal process, he was confronted with the potential consequences, the strain on his career, the public scrutiny, and the emotional toll of reliving the trauma. Yet, the prospect of effecting real change propelled him forward. The trial that followed was a pivotal moment, not just for Jamal, but for the national conversation about race and law enforcement. In a small-town courtroom that seemed to hold the weight of an entire nation's hopes, Lieutenant Carter stood tall, his military bearing and disciplined posture a striking counterpoint to the charged atmosphere. Inside those walls, every word spoken carried the weight of a collective demand for justice. Jamal's attorney, Ms. Monroe, presented their case with a fervor that left no room for doubt. She argued passionately that Jamal had been simply seeking a safe, well-lit spot to pull over, only to be met with inexplicable aggression that violated his basic rights. The courtroom drama reached its apex when the raw and unedited body cam footage was played before the jury. In that silent, tense moment, every viewer in the gallery was forced to confront the stark reality of what had transpired. Jamal's measured responses, captured even as chaos reigned, spoke volumes about his commitment to duty and his unyielding belief in justice. His calm demeanor in the face of escalating hostility contrasted sharply with the uncontrolled aggression of the officers. It was a visual testimony to the disconnect between the honorable ideals he represented and the misconduct that had marred that night. As the trial progressed, the defense mounted their arguments, painting a picture of a high-risk traffic stop based on a report filed by one of the officers, now renamed Officer Daniels for the sake of this narrative. They claimed that his actions, though harsh, were justified by a perceived threat level that no one but they could understand. However, the evidence was overwhelming. Jamal's cell phone recording, his own unflinching testimony, and the unedited body cam footage formed an incontrovertible narrative of a man treated with unmerited hostility despite his service to the nation. Outside the courtroom, the public's engagement was electric. Social media buzzed with discussions about police accountability and systemic bias. Hashtags dedicated to Jamal's case trended across platforms, and news channels reported on the trial with a mixture of hope and cynicism. For many, his experience was emblematic of a broader struggle, a call to reform. Policing practices that had long allowed unchecked aggression to flourish. Veterans groups, civil rights organizations, and even some progressive law enforcement insiders lent their voices, reinforcing the idea that true change required dismantling long-held prejudices and building a system founded on respect and accountability. As closing arguments approached, the atmosphere in the courtroom grew even more charged. Ms. Monroe delivered an impassioned plea, emphasizing not only the personal toll the incident had taken on Jamal but also its wider societal implications. "This isn't just about one night or one traffic stop," she declared, her voice resonating with both authority and empathy. "It's about creating a precedent, a future where every citizen, every service member, is treated with the dignity and respect they deserve." Her words struck a chord, capturing the collective hope of a community that had been waiting for change. After hours of tense deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict that sent shockwaves through the courtroom. They acknowledged that Officer Daniels had indeed violated Lieutenant Carter's Fourth Amendment right by conducting an unlawful search. However, they also ruled that this violation had been carried out without malice, a nuanced conclusion that resulted in a modest award of damages. Jamal was granted $1,000 in punitive damages and $2,685 in compensatory damages, a figure that fell dramatically short of the $1 million he had initially sought. The decision left many in the courtroom, and across the nation, grappling with conflicting emotions. For some, the verdict was a tentative victory, a recognition that even in a flawed system, accountability could be achieved. For others, the paltry sum was a bitter reminder that the scars of systemic injustice could rarely be measured in dollars. The aftermath of the trial was a study in contrasts. While the legal proceedings had formally closed one chapter of Jamal's ordeal, the ripple effects of that night were only just beginning to be felt. In the days that followed, the case ignited sweeping reforms. Public pressure, amplified by viral video footage and relentless media scrutiny, compelled law enforcement agencies across the country to re-examine their protocols. In one mid-size Midwestern city, a local police chief, visibly shaken by the incident, announced the immediate implementation of new de-escalation techniques and mandatory racial sensitivity training for all officers. "We can't ignore what happened to Lieutenant Carter," he said. "It's forcing us to take a hard look at our practices and make real, lasting changes." State and federal lawmakers, too, found themselves under unprecedented pressure. Legislation aimed at increasing transparency in law enforcement was introduced in several states, mandating not only the use of body cameras but also the creation of independent civilian review boards to oversee complaints against police officers. These measures, though incremental, signaled a shift in the national dialogue, a move toward a more accountable, transparent system of public safety. For Jamal, the journey was far from over. Though the courtroom verdict had delivered a measure of validation, it did little to erase the emotional and physical trauma of that fateful night. In the quiet moments that followed, as he sat in the emergency room with his eyes still stinging from the pepper spray, he reflected on the profound irony of his experience. A man who had dedicated his life to protecting his country had been subjected to indignity and abuse on his own soil, a stark contradiction that could no longer be ignored. With every painful memory, a new sense of purpose was forged. Jamal resolved that he would use his story as a catalyst for change, an enduring reminder that standing up against injustice was not only a personal battle but a collective responsibility. His transformation from a victim to an advocate was marked by his active engagement with community meetings, legislative hearings, and public forums. He began speaking directly to citizens, urging them to educate themselves about local policing policies and to demand accountability from those in power. "We all have a role to play," he declared at one community gathering. "Every voice matters in the fight for justice, and together, we can build a fairer society." His words resonated with many, igniting a grassroots movement that extended far beyond the confines of his own experience. Even some law enforcement officials, emboldened by the national outcry, came forward to acknowledge the urgent need for change. Former colleagues and current officers alike expressed their dismay at the practices that had led to Jamal's mistreatment. In a rare display of solidarity, several officers began advocating for internal reforms, challenging the long-standing blue wall of silence that had protected misconduct for far too long. Their courage in speaking out lent further credibility to Jamal's case and underscored the pressing need for a systemic overhaul. In the months following the trial, Jamal Carter's story continued to evolve into a powerful symbol of resistance against systemic injustice. News outlets revisited the case repeatedly, drawing attention to the broader issues of racial profiling and the treatment of military personnel by law enforcement. Veteran organizations rallied behind him, outraged by the disrespect shown to one of their own, and civil rights leaders seized the moment to call for sweeping reforms. Even as the nation's attention waxed and waned, Jamal remained steadfast, committed to ensuring that his experience would not be in vain. The incident also spurred significant changes within police departments nationwide. Across the country, departments reported increased internal scrutiny and a heightened awareness of the need for accountability. In many cities, the introduction of implicit bias training became standard practice, aimed at helping officers recognize and overcome unconscious prejudices. In one particularly notable example, a major city announced that every officer would now be required to clearly state the reason for a traffic stop before approaching a vehicle, an immediate response to the confusion and fear that had so marred Jamal's own experience that night. This ripple effect of reform was not limited to policy changes alone. Jamal's case ignited passionate debates in classrooms, community centers, and online forums, forcing many to confront the uncomfortable truths about systemic injustice in law enforcement. A community organizer from Virginia, where the incident had taken place, remarked, "This case has opened our eyes. It's not just about a single instance of abuse, it's about the whole system and how we need to reimagine public safety." His words underscored a growing consensus that meaningful change required a fundamental shift in how society viewed the role of law enforcement and the rights of those they were meant to serve. As the conversation evolved, so too did the public's understanding of the complexities surrounding police reform. What had begun as a story of personal suffering soon became a beacon of hope for those who had long felt marginalized and voiceless. Jamal Carter's transformation into a champion for change resonated deeply with many Americans who were eager to see tangible improvements in policing practices. His journey was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and a stirring reminder that even in the face of overwhelming adversity, one individual's courage could spark a national movement. In the wake of the verdict, the modest damages awarded to Jamal were met with mixed emotions. On one hand, there was a sense of validation, a formal recognition that his rights had been violated. On the other, the small sum felt like a meager consolation for the trauma, humiliation, and lasting emotional scars inflicted that night. Critics argued that no monetary award could ever fully account for the profound impact of such an experience, while supporters saw it as a crucial, albeit limited, step toward holding law enforcement accountable. For Jamal, the verdict was both a victory and a challenge. It underscored the urgent need for continued vigilance and reform while also affirming that speaking out against injustice was a necessary, if arduous, endeavor. "This is only the beginning," he told reporters in a quiet moment after the trial. "I will continue to fight, for every person who has ever been treated unfairly, for every voice that has been silenced, and for a future where justice truly prevails." In the days and weeks that followed, Jamal dedicated himself to further advocacy. He traveled to community meetings, met with lawmakers, and participated in public forums, each step reinforcing his commitment to a fairer, more accountable system. His efforts inspired many, creating a ripple effect that extended into every corner of the nation. As more people joined the call for reform, the collective determination to dismantle systemic bias grew stronger, weaving together a tapestry of hope and resistance that could not be ignored. Through it all, Lieutenant Jamal Carter's experience served as a stark reminder of the inherent risks faced by those who serve their country, even when that service is met with betrayal by those who were supposed to protect. His story is a testament to the fact that courage is not defined by the absence of fear, but by the strength to rise above it and demand change. If Jamal's story has stirred something inside you, whether it's anger, hope, or a determination to see real change, don't let this conversation end here. Join us in the fight for accountability and reform. Hit that subscribe button, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and let your voice be heard. Together, we can create a future where justice isn't just an ideal, but a reality for everyone. Thank you for watching, and remember, change starts with us. Stay informed, stay engaged, and keep fighting for a better tomorrow.